Okay, but Eric is a practicing Stoic, and Steve is a practicing Seventh-day Adventist. You would think we would be really polarized, and the fact is that we have to work to find common ground. So to start out with, Eric, why don't you introduce us to what Stoicism is? Because this is not something that most of my friends, in fact, I had one of my friends say, "What is a Stoic anyhow?"
Well, yeah, so Stoics or Stoicism is something most people know from history books. It is an ancient Greek and Roman way of life that has gotten some popularity with certain groups today who have kind of revived it and dusted off. And so the way I like to explain Stoicism is it was founded by a Phoenician merchant about 300 some odd years before Christ, who got shipwrecked on the shores of Greece. While in his ship, he was carrying a very expensive load of rich clothing and cloths. And he lost everything that he owned in this shipwreck, far from home, across the sea. And so he is living now, suddenly destitute, in the city of Athens, and he encounters a bookstore that has books on philosophy.
Now this sounds like a really traumatic event, okay? If I lost every resource I had, and was stranded far away, I would be pretty desperate. What's he doing in a bookstore interested in philosophy?
I think he's just that kind of guy. So his name was Zeno, and he's in this bookstore reading a scroll about Socrates. So Socrates had been dead for a few generations at this point. But he asks the bookseller, he's like, I'm in a hard time of life. I'm looking for some guidance here. Where can I find a man who lives like Socrates? And the bookstore owner points at a guy walking past in the street and says, go follow him, that cynic over there. So Zeno joins the school of the Cynics, who were one of a number of ancient Greek philosophical groups. And all of these different Greek philosophies at the time. At the time, philosophy wasn't this abstract, dry, academic thing we associate it with today. At the time, all the Greek philosophies, all of them, promised by some way or another to give you peace and happiness if you follow their way of life, despite all the throws and ups and downs that life inevitably throws at you. So Zeno starts following the Cynics, who weren't the dry political cynics we talk about today, but they had some of that aspect. But the Cynics' main point of view and belief was, well, to handle all the adversity life throws at you, what you got to do is develop a tough, thick skin. You got to have a stiff upper lip. And their way of dealing with misfortune was to detach yourself from the world as much as possible.
So they were British?
They were the stereotypical British stiff upper lip. Right.
Okay.
Right. So the analogy for the Cynics is they would try and develop calluses, figuratively and literally. They were known for going out in the dead of winter and hugging a cold stone statue just to train themselves not to care about temperature and so on and so forth. So Zeno thought, well, this has some value for me in my situation now, living as a destitute immigrant suddenly here in Athens. But he wasn't quite convinced. And so I don't know if he visited the Epicureans, who were another alternative school at the time. But if he did, we know he would have been welcomed outside the city by the Epicureans into what they called their garden. And if he showed up, they would say, "Friend, welcome." They would invite him in, hand him a bowl of cold, unseasoned, unsalted porridge, and say, "Welcome, friend, to our garden." And in the Epicurean way of life, they would try and teach him to cultivate pleasure as much as possible, but mostly internally. So learn to enjoy an unseasoned bowl of porridge. Develop friendships with us here in our garden, far away from the city where you have all those jobs and politics and responsibilities, and build your friendships so that you have a support network and a source of pleasure as you get older. And so Zeno said, well, okay, the Epicureans, they've got some things right, but this is a little radical. And what he ended up developing was a hybrid, where he's like, okay, we're going to take the Stoic emphasis on developing resilience and focusing on what is internal to us instead of being at the whim of our external situation. But we're also going to take the Epicurean awareness that we're human beings, right? And we have things that are natural for us, things that give us pleasure, things that give us pain that we maybe want to avoid. And he developed a hybrid of these two things that became very popular as the ancient philosophy of the elite Roman class. So probably the most famous Stoic is Emperor Marcus Aurelius. This is me with his statue at the Capitoline Museum in Rome on my honeymoon, trying to imitate his. I think he's forgiving Germans he's captured here with this hand signal. But and in the Stoic life, there are really, to boil it down, kind of three big ideas that I now try to implement in my own life in conjunction with my little Stoic fellowship group that meets on coffee shops sometimes where I live in Washington, D.C. And one is distinguish between what you can control and what you can't control. So in Stoicism, we really try to emphasize that we have some control over our opinions, motivations, reactions to things around us, and our ambitions to develop ourselves. But we don't control if our ship gets wrecked on the shores of Greece. We don't control if our house burns down or if our loved ones treat us in unloving ways and so forth. And that distinction is kind of fundamental. So it's a philosophy that aims at helping us develop inner peace in difficult situations. But another major component of it is what we do with that, what we do with our own agency. And that's where moral self-development and cultivation comes in. So we want to focus on what we can control, and what we can control is, how I converse with my father. I can control what I do when I get up in the morning. I can control, in principle, whether I behave in a lazy way or if I'm a go-getter, right? Now, we all know it's a little more complicated than that. Our biology kind of plays into our motivation and our ups and downs. But that's the basic idea, is that we want to try and pursue excellence within the constraints of the cards fortune has dealt us.
So, if I can play back what I'm hearing, Stoicism was a middle path between the stiff upper lip of cynicism and enjoy everything, even the cold bowl of porridge of the Epicureans?
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the Stoic.